The air in the woods was different that morning. Thick, dense with mist, as if the forest had been holding its breath all night. The sun was struggling to peek through the canopy, casting soft beams of golden light over the forest floor. It should have been beautiful, and it was, but there was something off, something I couldn't quite place. I'd been dreaming of this camping trip for months, the kind of weekend I'd always told myself I would take. A quiet escape, a chance to be with the woman I had secretly fallen for over the last few months. Claire. I never expected her to agree to come along. She was beautiful, confident, and effortlessly charming. Everything I wasn't. But somehow she had said yes. We'd met through a mutual friend, and she was always at the center of things, surrounded by people who seemed to hang on her every word. I'd quietly admired her from afar, always too shy to really talk to her outside of casual conversations at gatherings. Until one evening, when she leaned over to me, laughing, and said, "You know, I've always wanted to go camping, but never found anyone who would actually make it fun." It felt like the universe was giving me a sign. So I invited her. She was dressed in a flannel shirt and dark jeans, her hair tied back loosely in a ponytail as we made our way deeper into the woods. Her smile was easy, and I found myself lost in the way her laughter carried through the trees. I tried to push away the gnawing feeling in the back of my mind, the thought that maybe this was all too good to be true. It was just a camping trip after all, right? "So," she said, glancing at me, "what made you want to come all the way out here? I mean, I thought guys liked their weekends to be a little more exciting than this." I chuckled, rubbing the back of my neck nervously. "I just like being out here, you know? The quiet. It gives me a chance to think. Plus, there's something peaceful about being surrounded by nature." She nodded, her eyes scanning the forest around us. "I get that. There's something kind of magic about it." We had a small fire going by the time nightfall came, the glow casting long shadows against the trees. The air was crisp, and the crackling of the flames was the only sound, save for the occasional rustle in the woods. "I think we're alone," Claire said, her voice soft. She was looking into the darkness, and for a moment, I thought I saw a hint of unease in her eyes. "We are," I said, trying to sound reassuring. But my own nerves were starting to fray at the edges. The forest had taken on a new quality in the dark. Felt alive. Watching. I stood up to add more wood to the fire, trying to ignore the prickle of unease that crept along my spine. As I bent down to grab a log, I heard it. A low growl came from the darkness behind me. I froze. The growl wasn't far off, closer than I wanted to admit. "Did you hear that?" Claire asked, her voice suddenly tense. I nodded slowly, heart pounding. "Yeah, probably a bear." A bear. The words didn't feel right on my tongue. Bears didn't growl like that. At least not like this one did. This was different, darker. I turned back to Claire, who was standing up now, her eyes wide. The firelight flickered as I looked into her face, and for the first time, I saw fear there. Real, raw fear. "I think we should head back," she said, her voice trembling just slightly. But I couldn't move. Something in the shadows was moving, just beyond the reach of the firelight. I could feel it, and I knew Claire could too. Suddenly, there was a crack, a sharp snap of a twig from the woods. It wasn't the sound of an animal. It sounded like someone, walking in the forest. Not a bear, not an animal. People. Someone was out there. "Claire?" I whispered, panic beginning to rise in my chest. "We need to go. Now." She was already backing away from the fire, her eyes darting into the darkness. "What is it? Who's out there?" "I don't know, but we need to get back to the car. Now." Before I could even think about what to do next, the growl came again, louder this time, and something shifted in the dark just beyond the trees. The feeling that we weren't alone tightened around me like a vice. My heart was racing as I turned and grabbed her wrist, pulling her toward the path that would take us back to the car. But the woods felt different now. The trees were closing in on us, the silence was unnerving, and all I could hear was the sound of our footsteps, crunching over the dry leaves, mixed with the sound of something moving in the distance. And then, from the darkness, we heard it again. A voice. Not human. Something otherworldly. And it wasn't calling us. It was calling something else. The voice, faint but unmistakable, carried through the trees like a whisper, slipping through the air with an eerie, unnatural quality. It was as if the very woods were speaking, and the words were twisted, almost as though they were spoken by something that had never belonged to this world. I turned sharply, trying to pinpoint where the sound had come from, but all I saw was the suffocating blackness of the forest, stretching out in every direction. Claire was gripping my hand now, her body trembling, and I could feel the pulse of fear radiating from her. Who was that?" she whispered, her voice shaky. "I don't know," I said, my heart hammering in my chest. "But we need to keep moving. Stay close." We started walking faster, my mind spinning with thoughts of what could be out there. I'd been on plenty of camping trips, but nothing like this. The feeling of being watched, of something lurking just beyond the firelight, was overwhelming. As we moved through the woods, the air grew colder. The silence pressed in on us, broken only by the sound of our breath and the crunch of leaves beneath our feet. But the forest wasn't silent. It was alive, alive in a way I had never felt before. There were eyes watching us from the shadows. I could feel it, and I knew Claire could too. A snap of twigs to the left. Too close. I pulled Claire closer, my grip tightening around her wrist. "Keep moving," I said, my voice low and urgent. We rounded a bend in the path, and that's when we saw it. A figure standing just inside the tree line. It wasn't human. Not entirely. Its form was tall, too tall, and its features were obscured by the darkness, but I could make out the silhouette. It was hunched, with long, unnatural limbs that stretched far beyond what should have been possible. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, staring at us from the depths of the trees. I felt the blood drain from my face as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. My mind was screaming at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I couldn't take my eyes off the thing standing in the darkness. Claire tugged at my arm, but I was frozen. All I could do was stare, my mind caught in a terrible loop of disbelief and fear. "Is that?" Claire's voice was barely a whisper, but it felt like a scream in the quiet woods. "What is that?" I don't know," I stammered. "But we need to get out of here. Now." That was when it moved. Not forward, but sideways, vanishing into the trees with a speed that shouldn't have been possible. One moment it was there, and the next it was gone. But the air around us shifted. The shadows deepened, and the forest seemed to close in tighter. "Come on," I shouted, pulling her forward again. My breath was coming in short, frantic gasps. I didn't know what we had just seen, but I knew one thing for certain. We weren't alone. And whatever it wasn't going to let us leave easily. We pushed on, the path now twisting in ways that felt wrong, unnatural. The trees loomed overhead, their branches creaking in the wind, but there was no wind. The air felt heavy, thick with something unseen. Every sound, every movement in the woods seemed amplified, echoing around us. A snap of a branch. Behind us. Too close. I spun around, my heart in my throat, but there was nothing there. "Did you hear that?" Claire's voice trembled. "Yeah," I said, my own voice strained. "But we can't stop. Keep moving." We pushed on, every step feeling heavier, like the forest itself was dragging us deeper into its grasp. And then we reached the clearing. The car. I had never been so relieved to see the headlights shining through the trees, but as I reached for the door handle, the ground beneath us trembled. The growl, louder this time, closer. Claire's eyes were wide with terror, her hand clutching mine with a vice-like grip. "What is that?" she gasped, looking around, but all I could see were the shadows. Then I saw it, a flash of movement in the trees. More of them, figures, tall and distorted, stepping out from the shadows. Not just one, not just two, but several. They were circling us. The creatures from the woods. The things that had been watching us. They were closing in, slowly, deliberately. Their eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, and I could hear their breath, low and rasping. This wasn't just a camping trip. This wasn't just some wild animal. We were being hunted. "Get in the car," I shouted, finally managing to yank the door open. Claire stumbled in after me, but the creatures were too close. Too fast. I slammed the door shut, my hands shaking as I fumbled for the keys. But the engine wouldn't start. The sound of the growls and scraping noises grew louder, as if the creatures were clawing at the metal, trying to get inside. "I can't," I muttered, my pulse roaring in my ears. "Come on. Come on." Finally, the engine sputtered to life, but the moment it did, the car lurched forward, and I slammed the gas pedal to the floor, tearing through the woods. The creatures were behind us. I could hear their growls, their footsteps, even their breaths as they chased us through the trees. Every twist and turn of the road felt like a desperate escape, but I knew it wouldn't last forever. We couldn't outrun them. Not like this. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The growls faded. The sounds of the creatures chasing us disappeared. I glanced at Claire. She was pale, her face frozen in shock. She didn't speak. She didn't move. "Are they gone?" she whispered, barely audible. I didn't know. I didn't want to know. I kept my eyes on the road, praying to whatever force might be listening that we'd make it out of the woods alive. The forest stretched on, endless and silent behind us. But we weren't alone. Not anymore. The road seemed to stretch on forever, the headlights of the car illuminating only a small fraction of the dark, endless forest around us. The trees loomed like dark sentinels, their branches twisting in unnatural shapes, almost as if they were reaching for us. The weight of the silence in the car was suffocating, pressing in on us from all sides. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white, but I couldn't bring myself to relax. Every part of me screamed that something was still out there, something that wasn't ready to let us go. Claire hadn't spoken since we'd pulled away from the clearing, her eyes fixed on the road ahead, but her hand was trembling in her lap. I couldn't tell if she was in shock or just too scared to say anything. I wanted to ask if she was okay, to make sure she was still with me, but I was terrified of breaking the fragile silence between us. What had we just experienced? What had been out there in the woods? I glanced over at her, her face pale, eyes wide with a fear I couldn't have imagined before tonight. She was clutching her flannel sleeve, as though it were some kind of anchor in this nightmare. "Claire," I began, my voice barely a whisper. "Are you all right?" She didn't look at me, just nodded stiffly. But then, she finally spoke, her voice low and hoarse, as if the words had been caught in her throat for far too long. "I don't know," she said, her eyes staring blankly out the window, as if the forest could still reach out and grab her. "I don't understand. What were those things? They looked like people, but not human." I nodded slowly, unable to find the words to explain. I'd never believed in anything like this. Never. Not until tonight. There was a part of me that still wanted to deny what had happened, to tell myself it had all been some fevered imagination brought on by the dark and the stress of the trip. But deep down, I knew better. I could still feel the presence of those things, lingering in the air, just beyond the reach of the headlights. We passed the turnoff for the main road. We were almost out of the woods, but the feeling didn't fade. It grew stronger. A low hum started vibrating beneath the car. It was faint at first, just a quiet buzz in the floorboards, but it soon became unbearable. My heart skipped a beat as the sound morphed into a rhythmic thudding, like something pounding against the undercarriage of the car. My foot instinctively pressed harder on the gas pedal. "Did you hear that?" Claire's voice trembled. "What the hell is that noise?" "I don't know," I muttered, my voice tight with panic. I couldn't focus on anything except the growing thud beneath us. I tried to ignore it, to push through, but it was impossible. The sound of something dragging, like nails scraping against metal. And then, suddenly, the car lurched. The steering wheel jerked violently to the left, and I fought to regain control, my heart pounding in my throat. I slammed my foot on the brake, but the car skidded. "We have to stop. Something's wrong." Claire cried, her voice cracking as she turned to face me. I had no choice but to pull over. The tires screeched as I swerved to the side of the road, the headlights dimming as I turned off the engine. The woods around us seemed to close in even more, the silence deafening. The thudding stopped, but the air felt thick with something I couldn't name. I was terrified, but more than that, I was confused. What was happening? Why was this happening? And most of all, why hadn't we escaped? We were supposed to be leaving it all behind. I stepped out of the car, my legs shaky beneath me, trying to ignore the gnawing sensation that we were being watched. The trees were dense here, too thick for the headlights to reach very far. The forest was alive with the sounds of distant creatures, but they sounded wrong. Too loud, too close. "Stay in the car," I said, my voice low, as I walked around to the front of the car to inspect the damage. The headlights revealed nothing unusual on the road, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was just out of view, lurking in the shadows. I knelt to inspect the tires, but there was nothing to see. No damage. No sign of anything that could explain the thudding noise or the way the car had jerked like it had been struck. But then I heard it. A rustling, a low shuffle, the unmistakable sound of something moving through the brush, approaching fast. I stood up quickly, my pulse racing, and I glanced back at the car. Claire was still inside, staring out the window, her face pale and wide-eyed with fear. "Claire, get out of the car. Now," I ordered, my voice harsh and panicked. She opened the door, but as she stepped out, the noise grew louder, closer. I turned toward the woods, instinctively putting myself between her and the sound. I could feel it now, a presence in the darkness, something just beyond the trees, circling us. Then the rustling stopped. I strained my ears, trying to listen, but there was nothing, just the dead silence of the woods. "Stay close," I muttered, not looking back at her. I was terrified, but I couldn't let her see it. I had to protect her. Claire took a hesitant step toward me, her hand reaching out for mine, but then, just like before, a low growl echoed from the trees. Not an animal. No, this was different. It was guttural, inhuman. The ground beneath us trembled again, but this time it wasn't just a noise. This time it was real. Something massive was moving toward us, and it wasn't trying to hide anymore. It was coming for us. Before I could react, something crashed through the trees. The force was enough to send a wave of leaves and debris scattering across the forest floor, and I heard the unmistakable snap of branches breaking as something large pushed through the undergrowth. I turned to grab Claire, to pull her away from whatever was coming for us. But then, there was a scream that tore through the air like a banshee's wail. It wasn't Claire. It wasn't me. And it wasn't human. The scream tore through the night, sharp and blood-curdling. An unnatural wail that seemed to shake the very ground beneath us. My heart raced, my mind scrambling for a reason. Any reason, for what we were hearing. But the answer came too quickly. From the trees, something stepped out into the clearing. It wasn't human. Not by any means. It was tall, unnaturally tall. Its limbs long and skeletal, stretching far beyond the proportions of any man. The creature's skin was pale, almost translucent, like the bark of an ancient tree. Its eyes were too wide, too dark, and they gleamed like black holes in the night, swallowing up any light that dared to fall upon them. Its mouth was a jagged line, lips pulled back in a grotesque grin that showed rows of sharp, uneven teeth. The creature didn't walk. It stalked, moving with an eerie fluidity that defied the laws of nature. Claire let out a strangled cry beside me, and I pulled her close, my body shaking with fear I couldn't control. The creature didn't seem to care about us. Its attention was fixed on something else, something behind us in the woods. Couldn't breathe. My chest was tight, my head spinning. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't. I was frozen, paralyzed by the sight of the thing standing before us, its eyes flicking from Claire to me, as if considering us. And then, it turned, its long, spindly fingers reaching up to the trees as it stepped forward, one jerky, unnatural motion after another. It wasn't alone. There were more of them. 4, maybe 5, emerging from the darkness, their shapes distorted and nightmarish, more like shadows than creatures of flesh and bone. They surrounded us, closing in slowly, their movements synchronized in a way that made my stomach churn. I couldn't understand why they weren't attacking. They were just watching, waiting. But for what? The air around us grew colder, the temperature dropping rapidly as if the very forest itself had turned against us. I could hear Claire's shallow breathing next to me, her body trembling in my arms. I wanted to reassure her, to tell her it was going to be okay. But I couldn't. The words wouldn't come. The terror was too overwhelming. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw something else. A figure darting between the trees, moving too quickly to be human. A flash of movement, barely visible, but enough to make my heart stop. It was gone before I could react, but I felt its presence. I felt it watching us, lurking in the shadows. The growl returned, closer this time, louder, a deep, guttural sound that vibrated through my bones. The creatures turned their attention back to us, their heads tilting in unison, as though they were confused by our presence, trying to understand what we were. Then, a voice. No, not a voice, but a whisper, an ancient murmur carried on the wind. It wasn't words that we heard, not in any language we understood, but the meaning was clear. Run. It was a command, and just like that, I snapped out of my stupor. Claire, run! I shouted, the command raw and desperate. Without waiting for her to react, I grabbed her hand and yanked her forward, pulling her along as I bolted toward the car. My legs were heavy, uncooperative, as if the forest itself were trying to hold me back. But we couldn't stop. Couldn't stop. The sound of the creatures following us was unmistakable. The snapping of branches, the rustling of leaves, and that terrible growl that seemed to echo in the distance, growing closer with every second. Don't look back, I yelled, my voice strangled with fear. But as we sprinted through the woods, I couldn't help myself. I glanced over my shoulder. The creatures were there. They were following us. Their eyes gleamed in the darkness, the black voids of their gaze locking onto mine, and I felt a cold wave of terror wash over me. They were relentless, unstoppable. We reached the car and I fumbled for the keys. My hands were slick with sweat, my breath coming in sharp gasps as I desperately shoved the key into the ignition. Come on, come on, come on, I muttered, my heart hammering. Finally, the engine roared to life, and I slammed my foot on the gas pedal. The car lurched forward, the tires screeching as we tore through the narrow path, the trees blurring by in a dizzying streak of shadows and light. But I knew we weren't out of danger. The creatures were close, too close. I could hear them now, more growls, more heavy breathing, coming from the woods, just behind us. Their footsteps were rhythmic, thudding against the earth, like the beat of a war drum. It was only a matter of time before they reached us. And then, just as we rounded a sharp bend in the road, the headlights caught something in the distance. A figure, person. I slammed on the brakes. The figure was standing in the middle of the road, motionless, as if waiting for us. The headlights illuminated a man, his face gaunt and pale, his eyes empty. He was dressed in ragged clothes, the fabric torn and stained. His hands hung at his sides, twitching slightly, as though he couldn't control them. Get out of the way, I screamed, but the man didn't move. His gaze was fixed on the car, and his lips curled into a twisted grin. Before I could react, the car lurched again, as if something had struck it from behind. A massive impact. The rear end of the car was shoved forward, sending us skidding across the road. I twisted the wheel desperately, trying to regain control, but the car was spinning. The world outside the windows became a blur of motion. Trees, shadows, the twisted figure of the man in the road, and then, the screech of metal. The creature had caught up. I could hear its breathing close, almost deafening, as it slammed into the back of the car with monstrous force. My hands gripped the steering wheel, my body thrown back against the seat, but there was nothing I could do. We were trapped. The creature roared, its breath hot and foul against the glass. And then, the car stopped moving. The car had come to a halt, the tires screeching as they locked against the gravel. The engine sputtered, struggling to keep running, and for a split second, everything was still, too still. I dared not look back. Couldn't. The sheer horror of hearing the creature's breath so close to us, its growls vibrating through the metal of the car, paralyzed me. I clutched the steering wheel with both hands, my knuckles white with strain, unable to move, unable to think. My heart raced in my chest, the sound of it deafening in my ears. Claire was beside me, her body trembling. I could feel her fear radiating off her breathing shallow and frantic. I wanted to reach out to her, to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the rearview mirror. The thing was there, I could feel it, watching us, waiting. Then the growling stopped. A silence settled over us, so complete it was almost suffocating. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. I didn't dare glance back, didn't dare make a sound. My mind raced with thoughts of what to do, but every option seemed futile. If we stayed, we'd be trapped. If we ran, would it matter? And then, I heard something. A soft scratching against the metal. It was subtle at first, just a faint sound, but it grew louder with each passing second, like claws dragging along the surface of the car. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. It wasn't just one creature. There were more. I felt Claire's hand grip mine, her fingers cold and tight, as she whispered, "What do we do? What do we do?" "I don't know," I whispered back, my voice barely audible. "I don't know." Suddenly, the car lurched again. It was a violent jolt that made my teeth rattle in my skull. I slammed my foot on the gas pedal without thinking, desperate to break free, to escape whatever was behind us. The tires screeched against the gravel, and the car shot forward into the darkness of the road. But it didn't matter. The creatures were too fast. I heard the screech of claws on metal once again, and then another impact. This time, it hit the side of the car with such force that I was thrown against the door, the seatbelt digging into my chest painfully. "Hold on," I shouted, trying to steady myself. We were spinning now, the world around us a blur of trees and shadows. I fought to keep control, but the car was losing traction, and the road ahead was getting narrower, winding through the dense forest. The creatures were relentless. They were everywhere. Every time I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw something move, something dark and twisted, following us. Closer, closer. I couldn't see them clearly, but their eyes, those terrible black eyes, burned into my mind. They were closing in, surrounding us like wolves hunting their prey. We were running out of road. I slammed my foot harder on the pedal, my heart in my throat, but it was too late. The car hit something, rocks, a fallen tree, I couldn't tell, and jerked violently, throwing us forward with a sickening crunch. The airbags deployed with a loud pop, and I was momentarily blinded by the white, billowing clouds. I heard Claire scream beside me, but her voice was muffled, distant. The car skidded to a stop. For a moment, there was nothing but the silence. The forest had gone still. The growling, the scratching, the sounds of pursuit. Everything was gone. I blinked, trying to clear my vision, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My heart hammered in my chest, adrenaline still coursing through my veins, and I reached for the door handle. But my hand trembled so violently I could barely hold on. The silence stretched on, oppressive, suffocating. "Claire," I whispered hoarsely, turning to look at her. She was still there, but her face was pale, her eyes wide and filled with fear. Her hand was clutching her chest, as if trying to steady herself. She was breathing heavily, but she wasn't moving. "Claire?" I asked again, panic rising in my chest. "Please, are you okay?" She nodded weakly, but didn't speak. The forest outside was eerily still, the trees looming in the darkness. The headlights of the car were still on, illuminating the path ahead. But all I could see were the shadows, stretching unnaturally long across the road. The air felt thick, heavy with an oppressive sense of dread. And then, from the corner of my eye, I saw it. The figure. It was standing at the edge of the trees, just beyond the reach of the headlights. A man. I couldn't make out his features clearly, but there was something wrong with him. His skin was pale, almost gray, and his clothes were ragged and torn. He stood motionless, watching us, his face hidden in shadow. I froze. Something about the figure seemed familiar, but I couldn't place it. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it, when suddenly the figure took a step forward. "No," I whispered, my heart sinking into my stomach. The man stepped into the light, and I saw his face. It was the man we had seen earlier, the one who had been standing in the middle of the road before we crashed. But there was something different about him now. His eyes, those black empty eyes, stared at us, unblinking, and a twisted smile curled across his lips. "Get out of the car," he said, his voice low and guttural. I didn't respond. Couldn't. I was too terrified to move, to even breathe. "Get out," he repeated, his voice growing louder, more insistent. And then I saw it. Behind him, in the trees, the shadows moved. Not just shadows. Figures. More of them. The creatures. They were coming. And they weren't alone. I felt my heart stop in my chest. The man's presence, that horrible, twisted smile, and the way he stood there, watching us like we were nothing more than prey. It all became too real. The creatures behind him, their black eyes gleaming in the darkness, were closing in slowly, their grotesque forms shifting like phantoms in the shadows. They were too many. They were everywhere. We were trapped. I looked at Claire, and for the first time, I saw real terror in her eyes. Something primal, something that mirrored my own fear. She wasn't just afraid anymore. She was horrified. Her breathing was rapid, shallow, as she stared out the window, her gaze flicking between me and the figures emerging from the trees. The man took another step forward, his movements unnaturally slow, deliberate. Felt like the air itself was holding its breath. "Get out," he repeated, his voice chilling, like it came from the depths of a nightmare. I knew he wasn't asking. He wasn't even giving us a choice. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My chest felt tight, as if the very atmosphere was pressing in on me. I couldn't think, couldn't move. Then, in the distance, I heard the unmistakable sound of a branch snapping. The creatures were closer now, their eyes glowing faintly in the darkness as they surrounded us. Their growls echoed through the air, reverberating against the trees. Their sharp, jagged forms moved closer with every passing second, creeping in, drawn to us like magnets. There was no escape. "Claire, we have to go," I finally managed to say, my voice thick with fear. I turned the key in the ignition, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip it, but nothing happened. The engine sputtered and died. "Come on," I cursed under my breath, my heart racing. I tried the key again. Again, nothing. The car wasn't moving. I slammed my fist against the wheel in frustration, panic rising in my throat. The man stepped closer, his eyes never leaving ours. The creatures behind him were beginning to move in tandem, their bodies swaying like they were all part of one twisted, unholy organism. They were getting closer, their distorted limbs stretching out in unnatural angles. The dark shapes in the forest were coming to life. I turned to Claire, grabbing her hand. "We need to get out of here. We can't stay in this car. We'll be sitting ducks." Her grip on my hand was like iron, her face pale and taut with fear, but I could see the panic in her eyes. She was frozen, rooted in place. "I can't," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I can't do this." I squeezed her hand tighter, urging her to move. "We have to. We don't have a choice." The man was too close now, standing just in front of the car. His eyes, those empty, lifeless black eyes, bore into me, and his smile widened grotesquely. His voice, when he spoke, was even worse than before. "You think you can run from me? From this place?" The sound of his voice seemed to pierce through the night, filling every inch of the car, every corner of my mind. "Get out," he ordered again, a venomous command that carried a weight of inevitability. I turned to Claire, the fear in her eyes matching my own. There was no escape, no road left to take. We had to face this. I swung the car door open and pulled Claire out, yanking her to her feet. The moment we stepped onto the road, a chill rushed over us. The creatures were closing in, their growls growing louder, their eyes narrowing, fixated on us. But we weren't alone. The man who had led us here, the one who had ordered us to get out of the car, was stepping back now. Slowly, deliberately, as if we were nothing but spectators to his twisted game. Behind him, something else moved. A figure. A silhouette. At first, I thought it was another creature, one of the things that had been hunting us, but this figure moved differently. It was not hunched or twisted. It walked upright, its steps steady, its presence commanding. The figure stepped into the light. I gasped. It was a woman. She wasn't like the others. She was human, but she wasn't. Her skin was pale, unnaturally pale, like the moonlight itself had drained the color from her. Her eyes were just as black as the creatures, those dark, hollow pits, and they glowed faintly in the darkness. Her hair hung down in limp, tangled strands, but there was something almost regal about her, something powerful. Her presence was like a shadow casting over the land. Her lips parted in a faint, cold smile. You should have stayed away. The man, the one who had been leading us here, stepped aside, revealing the woman fully. The creatures paused in their movements, as though they were waiting for her command. The air was thick with tension. I could feel it in my chest, squeezing the breath from my lungs. Claire's grip on my hand was cold, her fingers trembling. I didn't know who this woman was, but the sheer power she exuded made my skin crawl. I'm sorry, the woman said, her voice soft and venomous. But you've intruded in our place, and for that you must pay. Her words sent a chill down my spine, and before I could react, before I could think of what to do next, the creatures lunged. Everything happened in an instant. The creatures, those twisted things, lunged toward us with terrifying speed, their distorted limbs stretching unnaturally. Their growls filled the air like the roar of a storm, drowning out everything else. I instinctively pulled Claire closer, trying to shield her with my body, but there was no way we could outrun them. They were too fast, too many. But the woman, the pale, ethereal figure who stood before us, raised a hand, and the creatures halted. They froze mid-motion, their eyes flicking toward her with a strange reverence, as if waiting for some kind of command. The forest was silent now, the only sound the rustling of leaves in the breeze. The woman's eyes, black as midnight, fixed on us with an unsettling calmness. Her lips parted once again, and she spoke, her voice a soft whisper that carried on the wind, seeping into our minds. You think you can escape, don't you? She said, her words chillingly calm. You think you can outrun this, but you cannot. I didn't understand. I didn't know who she was or what she wanted, but the feeling of dread that washed over me told me everything I needed to know. We were in her world now. We were prey caught in a game that had already been decided. Who are you? I managed to choke out, my voice barely a whisper. She smiled, a slow, cruel curl of her lips. Who I am doesn't matter. What matters is what you are. You've trespassed where you don't belong, and for that you must pay the price. The creatures around us shifted restlessly, their eyes glowing faintly as they watched us, their twisted forms waiting for the signal. My mind raced, my thoughts scrambled, and a part of me wanted to scream, to beg for mercy, to plead with her to let us go. But I knew better than to show fear. She could smell it. She thrived on it. Claire's hand was still in mine, but I could feel her grip loosening. I turned to her, her face pale, her lips trembling. She was terrified. We both were. What do you want from us? I asked, trying to steady my voice. What do you want? The woman stepped forward, her eyes never leaving mine, and the creatures followed her movements like shadows, silently waiting. She tilted her head slightly, as though considering me, studying me. I want nothing from you, she said softly. But you? Her gaze flicked to Claire and then back to me. You have disturbed something that cannot be undone. You are now part of this place, part of this darkness. And darkness always claims what it is owed. I didn't understand. The words were twisted, their meaning lost in the layers of fear and confusion. What was she talking about? What darkness? But before I could respond, the ground beneath us trembled, a low vibration that seemed to come from deep within the earth. The creatures around us stirred, their eyes flicking to the ground as if awaiting something. Then I heard it, a sound so faint at first that I thought I was imagining it. A distant, guttural roar, coming from deep within the forest. The woman's lips curled into a smile. It is here. I turned to Claire, who was looking at me with wide, terrified eyes. What's happening? She whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't know. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew it wasn't good. The creatures, no, whatever these things were starting to move again. They were shifting, circling us, their growls growing louder. The roar echoed again, louder this time, and I realized it wasn't coming from just one direction. It was all around us. Something was coming. The woman didn't speak again. Instead, she raised her hand once more, and the creatures stilled, waiting for her command. And then, through the trees, we saw it. A massive shape, larger than anything I had ever seen. It wasn't like the creatures that had surrounded us, no. This thing was different. It was monstrous. Its eyes glowed a fiery red, and its skin seemed to shimmer with a strange, almost ethereal light. It moved with a terrifying grace, its massive form gliding through the trees as if the forest parted before it. It was the thing that had been hunting us, the thing that had been calling us here. The woman stepped aside, and the creature approached her, its movements slow, deliberate, like it was savoring each step. The trees seemed to bow beneath its presence, the earth itself trembling with each step it took. It stopped just before her, its massive head lowering as it gazed at her with eyes full of malice. She reached up and touched its enormous head gently, her fingers brushing its dark, glistening skin. The creature growled low, a sound that seemed to vibrate the air around us. I've waited long enough, the woman said, her voice a soft, melodious hum. It's time for the reckoning. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. I was caught in the gaze of the creature, and for a moment, it was as if the world itself was shrinking around me. The forest had become a labyrinth, and we were the prey, surrounded by creatures and forces that I couldn't even begin to comprehend. Claire squeezed my hand harder, her body trembling against mine. What do we do? She asked, her voice barely audible. I had no answer. I didn't know what to do. There was nothing to do. We were at the mercy of whatever this was. The darkness had claimed us. The creature's eyes shifted to us again, its gaze heavy with something ancient, something primordial. It moved forward, its massive bulk swaying with each step, and for a brief moment, I thought it might strike us down right then and there. But the woman raised her hand again, and the creature stopped. She looked at us, her black eyes gleaming. Run, she whispered. I didn't have to be told twice. Before the words had even finished leaving her lips, I grabbed Claire by the arm and bolted into the woods. I had no plan, no destination, just the desperate need to get away from whatever nightmare we had stumbled into. The creatures followed us. I could hear them, their growls and footsteps echoing behind us, getting closer with every second. But there was something else too. The ground beneath us was shifting. The earth was moving. The darkness wasn't just behind us anymore. It was all around us. I didn't dare look back. Couldn't. The sound of the creatures chasing us, their low growls reverberating through the night, was enough to keep me running. Every branch I brushed past, every snap of a twig underfoot, felt like an eternity. But I didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Claire was stumbling beside me, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her feet unsteady on the uneven ground. I could hear her, faintly, calling my name, but her voice was swallowed by the cacophony of the forest, the sounds of something chasing us, something that wasn't human. I pushed her forward, urging her to keep moving. We have to get to the road. It's not far now. But even as I said the words, I knew they were empty. There was no safety to be found. Not here. Not in this forest. We ran for what felt like hours, the forest never giving us any sense of direction, always twisting, shifting, as though the trees themselves were conspiring to keep us lost. The darkness around us felt alive, suffocating, pressing in on us from every side. And then the first figure appeared, a shadow in the trees. It wasn't one of the creatures, not the monstrous things from before, but something different, a silhouette, tall and thin, moving with a smooth, unnatural grace. It was standing just ahead of us, its dark eyes glinting in the dim light. Claire froze, and I grabbed her arm, pulling her to the side. But it was already too late. The figure stepped forward, its presence overwhelming, its gaze fixed on us. I stopped dead in my tracks, trying to gather my thoughts, trying to figure out what to do. But my mind was clouded with panic. The figure was getting closer, its form slowly emerging from the shadows. And then, in the faint glow of the moonlight, I saw it clearly. It was the man from before, the one who had told us to get out of the car. His face was pale, gaunt, eyes sunken in their sockets, and his lips twisted into that same, unnerving grin. But something was wrong with him now. His eyes weren't just dark. They were empty, hollow. There was no humanity left in them.
No warmth.
Just darkness. He stepped closer, and I instinctively pushed Claire behind me, my body stiff with fear. "What do you want from us?" I demanded, my voice cracking. The man didn't respond. He just stood there watching us. His grin widened, more grotesque now, as if he found some sick amusement in our terror. From behind him I could hear more movement, more figures emerging from the shadows, just beyond the edges of the moonlight. They were the creatures, the ones that had been hunting us, the ones that had surrounded us near the car. They were closing in again, slowly but surely, their eyes fixed on us like prey, their growls filling the air. And then the man spoke. His voice was cold, detached, like he was speaking from far away, like he wasn't entirely present. "You should have left," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper, a rasp that slid like ice into my bones. "Now you're part of the forest, and the forest takes what it wants." His words echoed in the night, and suddenly the trees around us seemed to shift. The forest was alive, its ancient presence pressing down on us, making the very air feel thick with malice. I backed away slowly, pulling Claire with me, but the creatures were everywhere now. They were circling us, their twisted forms stepping closer with each passing second. We were trapped. I turned to run, but I could feel the ground beneath my feet shift again. The trees closed in, blocking any path forward. The shadows seemed to grow longer, the dark shapes of the creatures stretching out like claws, reaching for us. And then the roar came, louder this time, deep, bone-shaking, reverberating through the air and shaking the earth beneath us. It wasn't just a sound, it was a force. The ground trembled, the trees shook, and the very atmosphere seemed to distort. The creature, the massive, monstrous thing that had been calling us here, was moving closer. I turned toward Claire, my heart pounding in my chest. "We need to go," I shouted, but my words barely made it out. My voice was lost in the roar of the creature and the rising cacophony of growls and hissing from all around. But Claire was frozen. She was staring at the figure, the man who had been watching us, her face twisted with confusion, with terror. She wasn't moving. "Claire!" I screamed, grabbing her shoulders and shaking her. "We have to run. Please." She blinked, her eyes flickering with recognition, but there was something distant in them. She wasn't entirely with me. It was as if she was already lost to the darkness. And then, before I could stop her, she stepped forward. She walked toward the man. "Claire, no," I cried, my voice breaking. "Don't go near him. Don't." But she didn't hear me. Her movements were slow, deliberate, as if she was walking through a dream, her eyes never leaving the man. The creatures stopped their circling. They didn't growl. They didn't move. Everything went silent. The figure, the man, extended his hand toward her. Slowly, a beckoning motion like he was calling her to him. Claire reached out. Her fingers brushed his, and the moment they touched, I heard it. A low, inhuman sound. A hum. A vibration that seemed to fill the entire forest, emanating from the very trees themselves. The air grew colder. The ground began to shift beneath us once more. I didn't understand. I didn't know what was happening. But I knew one thing. I had to get her back. I had to pull her away from whatever this was. I ran toward her, my heart in my throat. But the moment I reached out to grab her, the darkness erupted. The ground cracked beneath us, the trees groaning in agony as the earth split open. The creatures howled, a terrifying chorus that echoed through the forest. I felt something pulling at my feet, dragging me down, as though the very forest was consuming me. Claire! I screamed, reaching for her. But she was no longer there. The woman, the pale figure, was standing in front of her now, blocking me from her. The forest was alive, and it was taking her. The forest roared. It was no longer a whisper, no longer a quiet rustle in the distance. The trees themselves seemed to shake with anger, their trunks creaking and groaning as though they were alive, as though they had been waiting for this moment. I could feel the ground beneath me shifting, pulsing with an unnatural energy, as if the earth itself had come awake. Claire's eyes were still fixed on the pale woman. The woman's smile widened as she took another step forward, her presence engulfing the space between us. It was as if the entire forest had become her domain, the creatures and shadows swirling around her, obeying her every movement. "Claire, please," I shouted, my voice breaking as I reached out toward her. "You have to come back. This isn't you." But Claire didn't respond. She stood motionless, her eyes locked on the woman, her expression blank, like she was trapped in some sort of trance. I took a step forward, and the air grew colder. The ground beneath my feet felt softer now, as though it was pulling at my boots, trying to sink me deeper into the earth. I fought against it, my heart racing, trying to push through the fear, through the overwhelming sensation that the forest itself was fighting against me. The woman tilted her head, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You don't belong here," she said softly, her voice like ice, cutting through the chaotic sounds of the forest. "None of you do." Suddenly, I felt something cold and sharp wrap around my ankle. I looked down just as a tendril of twisted roots, thick as rope, shot up from the ground and wrapped around my leg, tightened with terrifying force, pulling me down. I gasped, trying to free myself, but the roots were too strong, too fast. They pulled harder, dragging me closer to the earth, pulling me into the very ground. My breath caught in my throat as I fought against the suffocating grip, clawing at the soil, trying to escape. "Claire!" I screamed, my voice raw. "Please!" But it was like she couldn't hear me. Her gaze was locked on the woman, her movements slow and mechanical, as though she was no longer in control of herself. I yanked at the roots again, my muscles straining, but they wouldn't let go. I was sinking deeper, and the darkness around me seemed to grow heavier. The shadows stretched toward me like hands, reaching out to pull me into the earth. And then I heard it, a low, guttural growl, echoing from behind me. I turned, my breath freezing in my chest. The creatures were closing in. They weren't just circling anymore. They were charging toward me, their twisted forms blurring in the darkness, their eyes gleaming with hunger. The air around me crackled with an unnatural energy, and I could feel the weight of their presence bearing down on me. I twisted violently, trying to free myself, but the more I struggled, the tighter the roots became. My ankle was burning with pain, and I could feel the earth pulling me deeper. I looked up at Claire, her face pale and expressionless. The woman was reaching out to her now, placing a hand on Claire's cheek, her fingers gliding over the skin like a cold wind. Claire didn't react. She didn't even flinch. "Don't do this," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Please." But the woman didn't listen. She spoke again, her voice echoing in the oppressive silence of the forest. "It's too late," she said softly. "You've made your choice." And then, without warning, the woman turned toward me. Her eyes locked onto mine, and I felt a wave of terror wash over me. The world seemed to warp, the trees swaying like a nightmare, their branches twisting in unnatural directions. The ground beneath me trembled as if it were alive, as though it were rising to claim us. The woman raised her hand, and the creatures stopped. They paused, their dark eyes staring at me, waiting for her command. "Leave him," she said quietly, her voice a sharp command. I froze. The roots that had been dragging me downward suddenly released their grip, and I fell forward, landing hard on the ground. The creatures, the twisted things that had been hunting us, turned away without a sound. They didn't hesitate, didn't look back. They were gone. The forest grew still again, the tension hanging in the air like a thick fog. My heart was pounding in my chest, my breaths coming in ragged gasps, but I didn't dare move. I didn't dare look away from the woman. She was standing in front of Claire now, her hands clasped together in front of her, as if waiting. Claire's face remained blank. There was no emotion in her eyes. She was a shell of the person I had known, her humanity stripped away by whatever darkness this woman had brought with her. The woman glanced at me, her eyes cold and unfeeling. "You shouldn't have come," she said, her voice dripping with finality. "Please," I begged, my voice hoarse. "Let her go. She's not part of this." She didn't mean to, but the woman just shook her head, her lips curling into that same cruel smile. "You both are part of this now. You've crossed the threshold, and there is no going back." I reached out toward Claire, my hand trembling, but before I could touch her, the woman stepped forward, placing her hand on Claire's forehead. Claire's eyes flickered briefly, just a brief flash of recognition, and then they went dark again, completely empty. The woman turned back toward me, her eyes never leaving mine. "This is the price," she whispered, her voice soft and dangerous. "You came into the forest. You walked its path, and now it claims you." And then she stepped back, her gaze shifting to the creatures, who had begun to retreat into the shadows. The forest, it seemed, was settling back into its unnatural stillness. "No," I whispered, my voice thick with disbelief. "No, please don't take her." But the woman only smiled, her eyes glinting with something ancient, something unspoken. "You should have never come here." And with that, she turned, disappearing into the shadows, her creatures following behind her, fading into the night. The forest was silent once more, but it felt colder. The darkness seemed to cling to the air, and I knew that we would never escape it. Not now, not ever. Claire stood still, her body unresponsive, and for the first time, I felt a deep, overwhelming sense of loss. The forest had claimed us. We were its now.